Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Modern BioPharma podcast. Today, I'm excited to have a couple of guests on, and we're going to be talking about blockchain in pharma, blockchain in the supply chain. And I got two friends on today. My first friend we have on is Tanya Sharma. We know each other through ISPE. We've met at like pretty much every event. I feel like we're at together. So that's my first guest, and she has introduced me to Najib Rehman, who's over in the UK, and together we're gonna have a discussion about blockchain and pharma and see how this goes. So as we get started, if we could, real quick, Tanya, if you could go first, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do in the space.
So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us on your podcast. And my name is Tanya. I am from North Carolina, but I feel like I'm from everywhere because I've traveled a lot and worked in a lot of different places. And my specialty is in data integrity and compliance. I am the co-founder of Assurea LLC, and we focus on compliance around emerging technologies and personalized medicine.
Excellent. Awesome. As Najib, where everybody calls you Naj, that's what we've settled on. So could you tell us a little bit more about you and what you're doing?
Absolutely, Jesse, and thank you very much for inviting me as well. Pleasure to be here. So briefly, my background is very much big pharma. The bulk of my career, Pfizer for that matter. Did a lot of data infrastructure work, developing complex IT infrastructure, everything from the big ERP systems down to the more sort of nuanced high-powered compute environments that we were using more latterly before I left. Jumped into startup land, was really intrigued working for the by working for the UK Association for the Industry, so the ABPI. And there I kind of was exposed to several technologies as part of the real world evidence group that I was working with. Blockchain was one of them. And really the intersection of these new technologies is going to be really exciting, I think, for the industry. This sector, definitely, and how we kind of connect with the rest of the wider world is equally important for many reasons that I'm sure we'll go into in a minute.
Yeah,
that's me.
Excellent. All right, so yeah, it's funny. I think I met Tanya actually because of the podcast. I think is how we initially connected through ISPE, but that's how we initially connected. And
that's true.
I think when we first talked, you were stuck in Europe because of COVID. Is that right?
I was in Netherlands.
Yeah,
and it was during like the start of COVID.
Yeah.
When I was stuck in Europe.
Yeah, I just think it's funny how we can, and I don't remember, we were talking about women in pharma or something, and we'd never met before, and she was stuck in the Netherlands because of COVID, because nobody was allowed to travel anywhere. So, and since then she's been all over the place, and I've been right here in this room. I haven't moved.
I'm a bit like you, Jesse. I haven't moved too much either, really. This is the room I've been in for the last 2.5 years almost now.
Oh man. All right. Awesome. All right. So we're going to talk about blockchain, big subject. And, we did some pre-call on this and walked through a bunch of different stuff. And we're like, whoa, we can go in a million different directions, and we don't want to. However, it is a big issue, and there's lots of different thoughts or non-thoughts, and people just don't really know what blockchain is. And so we want to just, if we could, just bracket that a little bit. So if you could, I'm going to ask Naj to answer this. Could you explain what blockchain is to me as if I'm a 10-year-old? Because I'm not much better than that. So could you do that?
Hey, look, Jesse, you're not alone. I have to remind myself every day what it is. It's not the easiest thing to get your head around. But then I would actually argue you don't need to know how the engine or the electromotor in your car works when you kind of turn it on in the morning. You just know it needs to drive, right? And that's the important thing. But yeah, let's just start back with the basics of it. Essentially, blockchains, or distributed ledger technologies more properly, because blockchain is just a type of DLT, are really about how we handle the integrity of data in a way that we can make sure that nobody can manipulate or change it. It's really designed, a technology that's been designed, obviously everyone's familiar with the world of cryptocurrencies and finance where it's being popularized, but we're now trying to do the same in other kind of areas. And you mentioned supply chain. That's what our startup does, ATMPS Limited, just to get that plug in, which I forgot to do. We're really trying to kind of leverage this technology, which is about making sure that you can have integrity data, and Tanya's already mentioned that word, across the whole ecosystem. So many players can come in, jump onto the technology, quite literally, and use it so that they can make sure that everybody is seeing the truth as it needs to be seen by them. So you don't give away any secret source if you're kind of sharing information to ensure that the whole ecosystem can actually understand what's going on. I guess if I were to have a takeaway for everybody on the call or on the that's listening to the podcast rather, it'll be a case of think of this technology as something that's going to take away the hassle of managing supply logistics, complex supply logistics that you were going to be talking about, for example, with advanced therapies. It's really a technology that does that. So a short answer, I haven't gone into the details of what it is exactly, how it works, but it's a distributed ledger that enables us to kind of share information without it being susceptible to bad actors manipulating it.
Okay, so I want to just reiterate a couple of those terms. So distributed ledger technology is something that you just said, and you mentioned it as DLT. So that's some lingo, right, in the space.
It is. Forgive me for the jargon.
I just want to be down with it, you know. I try to say all the fun words with my kids and they make fun of me. That's how I know I'm getting old. So DLT, distributed ledger technology, I think that's important just because I have a funny feeling you're going to randomly say things like that for the rest of the talk. So I think that's important. And yeah, I have pictures of what a ledger is in my head. I feel like an accountant for a gang is what I always comes in my head when I hear the term ledger from movies, right? But basically, it's this place somewhere that I can't touch that is keeping some of this data of things that are being done, and whatever amount that is, right? Whatever you determine you want to have put up there, it's going back and forth. It's getting put there.
And I think
and everybody.
Also, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Tanya, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's also, you know, for us in the pharma industry, I mean, data is gold to us. Yep. And a lot of times blockchain is associated with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. But, you know, the way that we are using blockchain technology, it's not for Bitcoin and it's not a cryptocurrency. It's just a secure way, like Naj was saying, to secure our data and, you know, have an end-to-end solution for some of the work that we're doing in the life sciences industry.
Right. And so in the pharma space, you know, historically, lots of paper, right? Actually written down or printed out information with date and time stamp and signatures and things like that. And that paper would be stored somewhere. So that would be their own little mini ledger for different processes. So with blockchain, it has a reputation of being secure, I think mostly in the broader spheres, because we identify it with cryptocurrency and how nobody can touch it, nobody can mess with it. So it has that kind of reputation, feel that it is very secure. Who owns it? Can we talk about who owns the blockchain, and what does that look like in some of the outworkings that we're going to be doing in the pharma space?
Well, I mean, who owns the blockchain it's a good question. And I would say that it's going to be the ecosystem. So every stakeholder that is part of it, who becomes a part of it, will be the owner of it. So everybody from quite literally the guys that are going to be arguably creating the therapies, discovering it on bench somewhere in a university, spinning out, they'll be part of that ecosystem. You'll have the guys that are going to translate those discoveries into something meaningful for patients. Ultimately, they'll be the guys that administer those therapies, trial them out, ultimately use them for everyday purposes in real world. It'll be the logistics providers, the guys that kind of ship stuff in between, who are key in all of this. It's all that. So they will all have a part and a stake to play in it, a part to play in it, and equally a stake in it. And most importantly, of course, the patient, because identity of the patient is key. Integrity of the identity of the patient throughout the whole process for a personalized medicine, whether it's an autologous therapy or even an allogeneic one for that matter, a gene therapy or a cell therapy, or any other form of regenerative medicine for that matter. Arguably, the intersection between the various forms of therapeutics, we're going to see even software therapeutics and traditional small molecule implants and so on, will all come together. So identity of the patient is going to be, so they will all be part of the blockchain in that sense, to ensure that they have a stake in it, a part to own in it, or have rights over it, I should say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you started to touch on it in some of in that answer, But could we just sort of talk to why we're sort of pushing on blockchain for the pharma industry? Like, what is it about the pharma industry that makes it maybe a good use case or a good place to introduce this technology and start using it? Hey, I don't know, maybe Tanya, you want to answer some of that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're making so much stride when it comes to cell and gene therapy, personalized medicine, and there's so much innovation, and it's very exciting to be in the pharma industry right now. But it requires a very complex supply chain, and you have to work with geographically dispersed like clinics and hospitals and patients. And in order to do that, you need a solution that you're able to trust your partners that you're working with, your vendors that you're working with, and you have to make sure that the data that you have about the patient or the temperatures, or it's a cold chain. So you have to make sure that all of these variables are taken care of and everybody's looking at the same data across the supply chain till the medicine gets to the patient. And it's very unique because you have to make sure that the right, therapy is getting to the patient is at the right temperature. So we're advocating for blockchain because in these complex supply chains where you have like multiple parties that you're working with, multiple vendors you're working with, this enables people to have that like natural built-in trusting relationship with your partners. And also because there's so much uniqueness to the data, and critical data that's being shared across multiple parties, regulations can have more confidence on your data as well, that there's a permanent audit trail. And that's why I think that, some of the work that Hatali is doing as a platform as well is just so, so great for our industry because you're able to have like all these different multiple parties working together.
Okay.
I was going to just add to what Tanya said, absolutely everything that she said, but the bit that I think we need to just also bring up is the fact that we have a legacy of infrastructure and technology that is looking very dated today. Funnily enough, I was thinking about the clear out. Everyone's about to buy seasonal gifts and digging through to see what I need to clear out myself. And I found an original iPhone, the original classic iPhone one. And I tried to turn it on just to see if there was any use in it, any value to be had, apart from either giving it to an antiquities museum. Could I still use it today? And the reality is, this technology was 2009, 2010, maybe when I bought it. I can't remember now. It didn't have any meaningful use for me now. It was clearly redundant, and that's within 10, 12 years, right? So that's a bit of technology that we're going to have to now recycle. Bear in mind, most logistics and processes and technologies that we're using to track and so on for pharma were conceived in the 80s and built in the 90s. We now, and I dread to use, or I'm kind of thinking twice about using the pandemic as the reason, but we've seen what's happened with the pandemic. We're still relying on those technologies from the 90s, and they are fraying quite literally, not just at the edges anymore. It's getting into the core of the fabric of these things. Less than, I think less than 5% of the population of Africa, for example, have been vaccinated. There are many reasons why. There's a whole podcast in that alone to be discussed. But the reality is that low middle income countries are still struggling to get vaccinations out there. And we've got to ask ourselves why. We've got to do something. Something's got to change. Something's got to give. And it's not just a case of let's try and tinker around the edges of the legacy stuff that we built in the 90s and have been repurposing and sort of playing around with to see if we can tweak a little bit more out of it. We've got to have some sort of wholesale change. So what Tanya's described in terms of blockchain, I think what we're doing today in this space, the advanced therapy space, has value to be brought back into the bigger, wider, world of vaccines and small molecule as well. So
yeah,
that's
and I mean,
thinking about as well.
In the last 5-7 years, the logistics space has the supply chain logistics space has changed pretty dramatically in maybe on the consumer end of things, right? I mean, our ability. This is a little bit off, but I mean, I think about sometimes if you can order something that's really big, right? If I ordered a vehicle, right, spend thousands and thousands of dollars on it, right? you might get like a notification every once in a while of where it's at in the process. You don't know, right? But
Mhm.
right now I can literally order a pencil on Amazon, right? That costs 50 cents. And I can kind of know where that is every step of the way from the warehouse to my house. So that this consumer space has really pushed the limits of our access to seeing some of this, and companies like Amazon and Walmart have really pushed that pretty hard. And then in some of the more industrial space, where if you think about it, I much would prefer to really understand where something that I spent thousands of dollars on is at in the process, but I have no ability to see it. And I would think in this personalized medicine space, geez, that's right. You want to know where that is. If you have
Yeah.
and right now, again, and if you got a blood sample taken and you send it into somewhere, you don't know until the results are back. You have no idea, right? It goes somewhere and then it comes back.
And I think that, what Naj touched on also, with just like, if you look at different countries, for example, that don't have a lot of access, some of these therapies that we're working on, or even like the risk of counterfeit drugs, there's a lot of counterfeit drug use cases in some of these countries that we're discussing, but using blockchain, like you're saying, you're able to track end to end what's happening. And it's just, ultimately, we're all in this industry to serve patients. And I think it's such a great technology to be able to, keep making all of these differences, but being able to track and making sure it's safe and it's protected for our patients as well.
And it's a way to do it that's a little bit agnostic to the technologies that are out there, and you integrate with it. Am I understanding that correctly? Right.
Yeah. I mean, we know that there's going to be a period of time where we have to deal with the legacy and how we transition. Look, any kind of technical or IT infrastructure project, for those that are listening and have worked on these, will know that everyone will bear a few scars from those efforts. You've got to work with the old and somehow figure out how you're going to transition to the new. But we've got to do it. We've got to bite the bullet, to use that phrase, and get on with it. Because if we don't, we see it's not a case of now we're trying to kind of guess what it might look like. We know what it's going to look like. It's happening to us. The system has been pressure tested with a pandemic. And there are other political pressures that I won't go into that the UK have been going through, for example. But for everybody, we can all share in that common. Still, I was going to say history. It's not history. It's still ongoing. But the common sort of experience of the pandemic has shown us that these systems are being pressure tested every day, and everyone's kind of looking for whether they're going to get the gifts they want to buy. The question I would say that everyone, and I think we have a right to, we have more understanding of where the meat in our supermarket or the vegetables in our supermarket come from. But if you were to say to your physician or your nurse, practice nurse, or the pharmacist, or whoever professional that you're dealing with, where's the pill or the injection that you're putting into me come from? Can you show me how it's been sort of manufactured? What was the upstream ingredients that were put into it? How did it go through manufacturing? Did it hit all the marks? Has it come out of the factory and been delivered in a good condition, i.e. it hasn't been compromised in terms of temperature or duration? We don't have that right now. And if you're going to be talking about a $300,000 or pound therapy that you're going to infuse a patient with, the kind of stuff that we're looking at today in terms of complex and advanced therapies, of course you as a patient want to know exactly where it's been. I would, especially if it's been made from my own blood, my own white blood cells.
All right. So as we're talking about why it would be useful for pharma, anytime we talk about new technology, I mean, Naj just gave this example of the iPhone that he goes back and he looks at, and you're like, you can't use this anymore. But if you could go back in time when we first started using iPhones, I remember people going, how could you even use that? It doesn't have keys on it. Like, how do you type without key? Like, so the things that people are resistant to from a technology standpoint, it's almost comical now looking back, right? Because everybody had Blackberries and they're like, I can't feel the keys. So how could you ever type? So this is a big leap forward in technology. So there's layers and layers of things that I don't understand that have to change, adapt, whatever with it. So could we speak to maybe some of those things, that need to change, or some of the things some of the levels of adoption that need to happen in order for it to be sort of practical or useful in the space? You probably both have different perspectives on this. So Tanya, I'll maybe go to you this time and sort of what do you think there?
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up a good point about the iPhone and how, anything new, obviously there's going to be conversation around like, how can you even think of using this? And, we're as humans, we're risk averse. But I think also being in pharma, which is a very highly regulated industry, I think for a decentralized technology to work, you have to have multiple parties that are collaboratively working together, and you have to have a compliance backdrop to it. You have to have leadership that is encouraging innovation, organizations that embrace technology as a starting point, because they have to want to learn about blockchain and also just see how does it fit the current landscape of compliance. And Naj can talk more about just Hatali platform, because they come from that background of like, okay, compliance and pharma, and what do companies need from a compliance perspective for something like this to be widely accepted. And another example that I wanted to highlight was a Pharma Ledger, because it's a consortium of companies that are working together to build a framework of, what does the adaptation of blockchain look like as well, which I think these type of partnerships and pilots is a way forward to show that this technology has a lot of potential in our industry when all these companies work together and collectively to form that framework.
Okay, just bear with me, because I'm sure that there's people just like me that don't understand this stuff that have made it this far into the podcast. So when you talk about Pharma Ledger setting this thing up, what does that mean? Is it like a platform that somebody would institute in their own space, or is it like everybody's working on this in this one big giant blockchain, universe together, and you just have little pockets within it? Could you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Pharma Ledger is a blockchain-enabled platform that has different and it's in Europe, and it has different companies, I think 12 or 13 companies that are working together on different use cases. Supply chain's one of them, counterfeit drugs is another one, that work together for a framework of like principles and compliance and regulations that we should kind of have in place. But because it's a consortium and different companies are working together, it gives you that collective feedback of what will work internal in organizations and what won't work. And it's similar to what Hatali is doing too, with working with different partners, and having these pilots, because if you have these pilots and you show that multiple parties are able to work together and provide this end-to-end solution, then you can show the potential benefits of something like blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Okay.
it's so decentralized, like you need that kind of information.
Right. All right, Naj, what do you think on this? Are we still on the same wavelength?
Yeah, no, I think we're pretty much on very much on the same wavelength. As Tanya says, the Pharma Ledger is a really good initiative, top down. It's a European endeavor, being led by the IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative,
Mm-hmm.
which is a conglomeration of most of the big pharma, 20 or so plus, are involved with it, and you've got investment. It's a public-private arrangement with European agencies, Parliament involved as well. So there's funding from a European level as well into the whole project. And as Tanya says, they're trying to build a consortium that is trying to create the right ecosystem to enable change management within this sector, health and pharma, to improve the adoption. So players like us will be part of that ecosystem as and when we choose to join in. Right now, they're working on a handful of use cases. I think I saw a podcast recently on EPI, so electronic product information leaflets and things like that, which is really interesting. And it's great that they're getting that awareness up. But it's about awareness. And coming back to the bigger question, so and we're, like I say, Hatali and ATMPS are part of that. But the wider question around adoption, I guess. I mean, it is change management, as with any new technologies or anything new, regardless of technology. Actually, I'll go back to something that IBM, I'll give IBM this credit in that, they spoke about people process technology many years ago, around the time I was born, and that's going back a long time. So that still holds true, that principle of people process technology. You've got to kind of get the people on board. The processes and definitely the technology are enablers of all of that, whether it's blockchain or whether it's IoT or machine learning or AI, whatever it is, it's regardless of the technology, it's the enabler. So we've got to get the kind of change management cogs and wheels going. We can be a part of that. And forgive me for paraphrasing, but Curtis Carlson, who was the CEO, chairman of the Stanford Research Institute, arguably one of the most prolific organizations for spinning out technology and into companies from a university setup. He speaks about, or he said, there's a quote of his where he talks about, innovation, the ability to access innovation is now cheap with the technology that we have around us, and getting those ideas. But really, the kind of way to innovate from a bottom-up approach is actually probably quite chaotic, but often very smart. So you're kind of very messy, and you're probably telling that from the way I'm articulating myself. But as a startup, I've certainly experienced that. That said, I've also been on the other side of the fence where I've been in big organizations where things are a lot more organized, far more structure in place. And his words, not mine. I think he talks about it being very organized, but occasionally the innovation is a little bit dumb. It's not getting there fast enough, I guess. So I believe there's going to be a hybrid of that. The two have got to come together at some point. So it's got to come from top down as well, bottom up from likes of us on the cold face who are really kind of scrappy, to use that phrase, but really pushing the boundaries. Forgive the pun, but we're quite literally on the bleeding edge of technology here, and I believe that that's needed as well. So we need both.
Right, and I think that's a technology adoption or a technology innovation issue, no matter what, because the larger the organization, the more institutional resistance there is to failure. And if you always have resistance to failure, the chance of you really wanting to do something that's going to break the mold is going to keep going down and down, because the more you do something that's out of the norm, the more likely you are to fail, right? So the large organizations have a history of not being as good at dealing with that kind of thing. And in this ATMP space, while certainly all the big boys are engaged in it, there's a ton of little guys out there doing it, a ton of them,
Absolutely.
right? And they're the ones that
right,
really pushed it, and then the big guys buy them out, and it becomes part of what they're doing too. So
I think that you definitely need, like startups. You need startups to be those change agents to show that this works. And you, like Naj was saying, you have to definitely have a hybrid for sure, where you have people that are advocating for new technologies and innovation and kind of take the risk as well of, being like, oh, we're going to try it. Because as in large organizations, there's sometimes a lot of bureaucracy around these things, and with startups you're able to kind of at least take the risk sometimes on these initiatives.
I don't know, we've said this already, and Tanya's absolutely right, that the industry is generally risk averse, and for good reason. There are plenty of examples historically of disasters that have plagued us with drugs that have got into the market and caused all sorts of problems. So we need to kind of get better at it all the time. But it can be managed, and we can, like I say, have both. I believe that we do need the startups like us, both Assurea and ATMPS, to kind of push the boundaries in terms of where we can get that adoption. And it's the early adopters that are going to be the pioneers of this. So, we can create it, but we do need the larger entities, the big organizations, the big pharma and the bioscience to kind of say, well, hey, let's have a go. Let's try this. I think I can say this because it's in the public domain, but Novartis published the results of Belinda recently. Suffice saying, they were looking at lymphoma and trying to see if it could be used, their CAR T to be used earlier. And there were some challenging results for them, let's be straight. But it was done during a very difficult time, during the COVID period. And logistics times, one of the reasons that they believe potentially that caused some of the challenging results for them was the delays in logistics. Now, if there isn't a case now to be looking at, and what I don't think anybody else should be doing, the other companies that are also making CAR Ts, and it's a very crowded marketplace, the CAR T and the space, shouldn't be thinking, well, hey, you know what, we're all right because we can do it quicker. The more crowded it becomes, the more strain there will be on that already overstrained and overburdened logistics, supply chain and operation. So we've got to look at that and make it better.
Can we do something here then? I just want to make sure I'm painting a right picture, because we're bouncing all things back and forth. So what does that look like? So that, you know, they had, you know, maybe some problems with transportation, being able to get something from here to here in as efficient means as possible. So what does that look like? Well, how does blockchain change that? How does blockchain improve here to here from a speed perspective? I mean, we've talked about visibility, right? So that might inherently be faster. I don't know. I'm not shipping things, so I don't really know that. But what does that look like? Who are the people? Who are the groups that are involved in here to here? And how would using blockchain as the sort of backbone for all this make it more efficient, and then maybe lead to a faster process as well? Can you speak to that? That might, I don't know, maybe that's too much, but kind of want to have a real picture of what
I think we should give an example of like the, you know, like for Tali, for example, like the hospitals and like the CMO and the companies, like everybody that's involved, so that people have an example in their mind.
Right. So like, just, you don't have to have every single step, but like the major players, what does that play out like?
Well, do you want me to have a bash first, Tanya? Then please step in. What I would say here is that it's not a case of just having everything on the blockchain or a one player, one manufacturer, one logistics. The way that this value proposition is going to work, and the way we see it working, and the way, let's look at other sectors, but let's focus on pharma and this particular example of cell therapies, is that if we have competitors collaborating and cooperating on an ecosystem, we can start to build up a full picture, a complete picture of what's happening, where we can start to understand with the pinch points, the bottlenecks, and so on. Now, blockchain isn't going to fix those. It's not going to fix the fact that you can't get stuff onto a handful of flights now. Let's just take the example of the fact that flights were reduced. Now, most aircraft can only take a certain amount of liquid nitrogen product into their cargo holds for many, actually, compliance and regulatory reasons. You've got to understand the compliance and regulatory around transportation as well. If we can understand what that looks like, we can have feeds of, for example, how flight paths were affected by the pandemic, then we can start to understand what the system is capable of handling. And if you can ensure that you don't put more into the system, because you have that full visibility across the whole ecosystem of the whole of the competitors and the collaborating and cooperating at the same time, you can start to understand what you can do with the kind of constraints of the existing ecosystem. Right now, we do not have that. You know, time and time again, we hear from every stakeholder that we just don't know what's available right now, or we're having to be scrappy and trying to get around and find new flights or new ways of getting stuff shipped and moved around. Every manufacturer has spoken to the fact that when flights suddenly kind of disappeared after the pandemic, or due to the pandemic, you know, airlines had cancelled all their routes. They were having to find other forms of shipping. You know, a lot of them were using vans and trucks and so on, if they could move across a border that was not separated by sea. Obviously, sea causes a huge problem. You do need aviation in that regard. So it's that sort of thing. It's that holistic view of being able to kind of see what's going on. Let's talk about consumables. So you need a lot of stuff, not just the starting material, the blood, the cell tissue that you need from a patient. You also need other elements in the manufacturing process that you need to understand what's coming in. What if you've got reagents or excipients that you need that you can't get hold of because maybe somebody else is holding them, but you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that manufacturer A has them. You might be manufacturer B and you're thinking, I'm a bit low on this. But if you had an ecosystem that actually allowed you to see their inventory for non-competitive ingredients into the mix, so to speak, wouldn't that be a great thing? Because then you can start to say, well, actually, do you know what? We can have a trade here. We can figure out. And by definition, blockchain comes from an environment where it was all about trading in terms of finance and fintech and crypto.
Yep.
Why not build that into technologies for pharma and supply chain as well? So you can actually trade non-competitive materials and goods. So you can actually make that more efficient. So does that start to give you a flavor? I mean, there's a lot that I can go into around how you can do the Monte Carlo simulations, for example, of how supply chains should work to optimize, and that balance of resilience and efficiency. It's all about that sort of stuff. So that's what we want to get to. We're still at the nascent stage of all of this, early days, but we're definitely looking at doing all that sort of stuff.
Do you see maybe the idea of I'm just going to use the term companies because it ends up being a company or multiple companies that engage on this together. They're not going to just commit everything to it. They're going to commit little chunks of their business, right? So that's why we talk about supply chain, because supply chain seems to be a space where this works, right? Is that how this is going to play out? And then as they get that use case of supply chain, then they go, yeah, we could do that with this over here as well. We could do that in manufacturing. We could do that in I don't know. You were talking on our pre-call about the idea of using blockchain for airspace for airplanes. I'm like, I don't, that's so is that how it's going to go? Is it just going to go little pieces at a time as companies try to adopt this?
I think what will happen is that there'll be many work streams working in parallel.
Okay.
I mean, we're working in one specific area of, Tanya and myself in supply and manufacturing and compliance and regulatory around that. There are others that are working in lower airspace for drones. Boeing got investments in that. Why would I want to invade in their space? Yes, I have an interest in aviation from my background, but it's not. There are others that think, why not just tap into it? Going back to this idea of digital disintermediation that I've sort of spoke about, I think in the pre-call, where you can actually disintermediate digitally. What that means is that we keep the plurality of suppliers, but we can actually connect everything onto the one digital platform that allows you to kind of see everything. So if somebody can manage lower airspace for drone, for example, why not just plug into that? If we can leverage drones for moving stuff around in pharma and bioscience, why not? Let's just plug and play if we can.
Right.
So that's the way I see it going. And it's not just, we're talking about, it could be anything, whatever. Identity is the one we haven't even touched on, which is the biggest, probably the most important thing we need to talk about. Identity of what is referred to as verifiable credentials, both not just of individuals, but we're talking, because everyone associates identity and identification as single sign-on, but there's more than that. It's just, It's much more than just single sign-on. We're talking about identity of individuals, organizations, and things. And there's a lot of things out there, everything from the chips in your computers to the raw materials that make those chips. We've got a lot of things that we need to kind of create identity for. So that's a massive, massive area that needs to kind of connect with what we're doing. Tanya, sorry, I've kind of, is there anything that you want to add?
I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and kind of highlighting that, blockchain supports many use cases. And we're just doing, we're like Naj was saying, that we can tap into so many other use cases also. And another thing that I think that, like NFTs that we've seen, that there is so much on the non-fungible tokens, where people now are able to, create music or art or things that they can kind of have as an NFT, and anything that you're contributing to, for example, you can have a property right over. And I think that's, revolutionary, where we weren't able to do that before. And, you might be able to have a smart contract in place, for example. So every time something gets resold, you get a certain portion of it, which, typically you're not able to do that as an artist or a musician. And, it opens up so many different channels of how you can leverage this open source that you weren't able to do before.
Absolutely, and that's digital scarcity, an example, NFT.
Yeah.
And for pharma and bioscience, plenty of regulatory documents that we can turn into NFTs if you want, and you can hold those and store those. Why wouldn't you? Why would you not do
Why
that?
wouldn't you not?
I agree. Absolutely. We should probably talk about net zero as well. I mean, there's a huge area to explore and open up with how we're going to leverage this technology for managing net zero. And we know that we are a carbon greedy industry.
Can you just say what that is? Because we're just throwing terms, and I know you know what all this means, but just like what is net zero before we go anywhere?
Tanya, I'll let you do this one. Go for it. Yeah.
So it's our, sustainability initiatives of getting to net zero, where a lot of companies have like sustainability initiatives. And what Naj was referring to is that, there's carbon credits, for example, that now a lot of companies, even pharmaceutical companies, that have to kind of show that, okay, we're reaching the set points that we said that we would, but how do you verify and how do you show that you're credible that you reach those set points for your sustainability initiatives? So reaching net zero and using blockchain for carbon credits, that's another, whole different element to this, but you can use blockchain to kind of see.
So it's a way of documenting it. That's that you can't mess with and you can't change and all that, right?
Absolutely, and let's not forget that will be what we'll do. We'll find algorithms that will enable us to kind of measure what's the impact of a given process or technology or career, whatever it might be, and we'll capture that and make sure that's kind of recorded. But then others are working in the energy sector trying to figure out how you can actually trade this stuff. Let's be honest. We are a carbon heavy. There's a lot of waste. The supply chains of pharma and bioscience have always been very much, certainly in the small molecule space, just in case rather than just in time. I'm not suggesting that we should be just in time. There's, like I say, that conversation about resilience and efficiency. But we can tap into work that's being done in this sector, and there'll be so much more to kind of make that interoperable with the stuff that's being done in the energy sector with blockchain and distributed ledger.
So I want to just touch real quick. I got a couple of notes before the podcast. We'd put out a request. Hey, anybody got any questions? And I actually had a few that were all along the same vein, essentially, and we've spoken to it, but just not used the term. But I'd like us to. How does this impact, or how do we use this in regards to 21 CFR Part 11 compliance? Right, it's a big issue, especially with anything related to data. So how does that all meet? Is that all part of that conversation in the space right now? Say in 21 CFR compliance, is blockchain part of the discussion, or are the proponents of blockchain trying to push themselves into that discussion? Could either of you speak to that?
I mean, if you look at it, it's, data integrity by design, and Naj and I have talked about this a lot of times, where, it's very hard to tamper information on a blockchain. But I think that it's up to organizations to have internal procedures and processes to understand, like, okay, what is the intended use and what is the impact? And based on the impact of blockchain and looking at like all of the critical functions and features, then you need to develop like, audit trail review procedures, access control procedures, data integrity policies around it. So it's a lot of governance around it, but the technology and the design of it in itself is, a really great way to have that permanent audit trail and all of this data that you can show to regulators that there's no way that anybody can tamper with.
And just
is that already being discussed with regulators? Are regulators familiar with this on any kind of level, a meaningful level, so that conversation is happening?
Yeah, so actually in the US, the DSCSA, which is the Drug Security Supply Chain Act, there is an initiative from them that, everything on the supply chain needs to have a unique identifier. And blockchain was looked as a potential solution to fit that initiative, and data integrity and governance around like why this was a potential technology to use. The regulators are already looking at decentralized technology such as blockchain for some of these initiatives, and Naj can add more to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely in the US, we know the FDA have been probably, well, very proactive, extremely proactive, but it's beginning to happen here in Europe as well with the MHRA and the EMA in Europe as well. Just on a slightly technical note, Tanya's absolutely right. It's by design. So regulatory compliance, 21 CFR Part 11, by design. The way the technology works, I guess the clue's in the name, it's distributed and it's a ledger, as you quite rightly pointed out earlier on. So everyone has a copy of this ledger. What you're doing with each and every event that you want to record from a 21 CFR Part 11 is digitally attestated by the technology itself, by design. It's the way cryptocurrencies work. You couldn't have the issue of double spend addressed, and that's another bit of jargon. I understand I've already thrown that in. We'll explain that another time.
But it's like inherently an audit trail, right? Like it is an audit trail.
You couldn't create a digital currency if you couldn't deal with the issue of double spend, which inherently deals with 21 CFR Part 11 by design. It's not something you have to add on. It's not a lean to the 90s technologies that I spoke to earlier on. This technology does it by its inherent properties, by virtue of the fact that it was designed that way.
Interesting. Yeah, this is to me, I remember the first time you mentioned it to me, Tanya, I was like, oh, this seems like a perfect, solution for all this. And it just seemed like inherently perfect for that question in pharma. So, we're running out of time here. So I want to get to maybe a last couple things. First, so I'm going to ask two questions that are going to be kind of opposite. So first off, what do you see as the first question? This is we're going to finish this off. What are the downsides to this? Do you see downsides to this? Let's just say if you can get past some initial hurdles, which everything's always going to have some initial hurdles. Do you see downsides like out in the future to this that you're ultimately, you're going to end up dealing with, say in 8 years or something like that? Do you see anything like that?
I can take that one to start off with.
All right, sorry, I should probably just say that.
From a technical point of view, of course, a phrase that a good friend of mine uses, and I've stolen from him, is this idea of forever is a very long time. And, we're seeing that in social media, right? And that's not as permanent as say a blockchain or distributed ledger. So we've got to think about that and what that looks like. So what we put onto the chain, onto the blockchain, needs to be considered. So hence we need to have strong governance, strong control, strong change management around all of this. That's why the consortiums that Tanya spoke to earlier on are really important. We need to make sure that framework's in place as we start to build out the actual physical technology as well. So yeah, in that sense, you don't throw anything, the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, paper is brilliant in that sense. You can write something on paper and burn it and it's gone. So paper is, in that sense, is the most expungible of records that you can ever imagine. So that, I think, is definitely something we've got to think about, as what we design today needs to deal with the advances in technology as we move into the future. And we're not that far off sort of quantum capabilities. People are talking about the quantum internet and quantum blockchains and quantum computing and on all this sort of stuff. So we've got to be ready for that. How do we manage that, and what that looks like, I think is going to be very important.
So forever is a long time. That's a great term. I like that.
And I think it's so true what Naj is saying about looking at social media, and the next generation of social media also is going to be collaboratively very immersive as an experience for us. And forever is a long time, and there's going to be so much data out there about us, which I do feel that we have to be aware of, to think about what is the type of data that is out there about us. And I mean, this might be a little off track, but what if you were doing like a quick Google search of what is like a really good vegan burger? I'm using vegan burger as an example because I'm vegan, but if
I
you
would
were
never
to,
search for that, but I get you.
but if you were to search for, okay, does McDonald's have a better vegan burger, or Burger King has a better vegan burger, you know? And you somehow clicked on something that said Burger King is better, and your searches just got to Burger King is better than McDonald's. And subconsciously, you're thinking of Burger King now more than McDonald's. And sometimes in that scenario, the virtual identity that you're creating is very different than maybe your personal beliefs. But you know, the data points are aggregating to make you believe that you believe something differently. And I think that that's something that with the metaverse and, you know, Web 3.0 and all these, even in our day-to-day, like you click on anything on Google, it's going to give you curated experiences based on your search that we kind of have to think about too, you know?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I should Google what is better for a vegan
Yeah.
burger.
I don't want that.
Wait till you get the next generation of search engines based on a distributed ledger, because I think that'll be probability based. It'll be a whole different experience. So
Yeah.
that's
all right. So we just got a couple more minutes, and I guess I wanted to end with what, you know, I just wanted to sort of hear a downside. We talk about things, we're always talking positive because this is, you know, looking forward and cool, but what are you most excited about with this? I mean, you guys are both jumping on a technology that's been around for a little bit, but from a maturity standpoint and how expansive it is and where it is being utilized, it's still super, super new. So you obviously, you know, early adopter type people. So what are you most excited about in the last couple of minutes we have left? You want to start, Naj, again?
Yeah, very quickly, I would say that today we're working, the amazing bioscientists that are working on these advanced therapies that are going to cure people, you know, cell and gene therapies, regenerative medicine. We've got a challenge on our hands, and that is the fact that the price point of these things, cost of goods, is prohibitive. They're drugs not for the many. So how do we make these advanced therapies for the many? And I believe that technologies like this are potentially one of the key enablers to allow that to happen. So we want to make these therapies not just for a handful of well people. We want to make sure they get out to everybody that needs them. So make advanced therapies. And I believe that we have now got potentially the means to enable it to happen. So yeah, the big guys, we can't sit on our laurels. That's what I'll add in. So don't sit on your laurels. Don't think that it's okay. We've got the answer to it now. You haven't. We can make it even better by taking advantage of these new tech.
Awesome. Tanya, you got anything to add there?
I mean, you know, I think that I'm very excited about our partnerships with companies that are really bringing and bridging the gap in these technology and innovation. I mean, I think that those and from just a data integrity and compliance aspect, I think that looking at these technologies and implementing and integrating them, I think it's a very exciting time to do that. So I'm very excited to move forward. And, you know, like Naz was saying earlier, I think that a lot of this needs to come from bottom up also, and, you know, taking the risk and showing that this works.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't know. I'm an early adopter. I was the guy with the original iPhone because I was like, this thing rocks, right? You know, I can't help myself. If I had the money, I'd have a Tesla just cause, right? Just because I want to be that guy. And you know, in the pharma space, there isn't always a ton of new technologies. But if there's one thing I've heard consistently in all the interviews I've done in the last year, and I say, what are you most excited about? Without fail, I mean, the answer is this ATMP cell and gene therapy space, like because it just seems like such a leap forward from where we've been, right? And I just think that, I mean, it seems to be where we're going. Some of this other, what we've done for forever isn't going away, but it's just so exciting to feel like you get to be a part of something that could literally cure, instead of just, you know, it's not just aspirin for your headache. It's taken whatever that was causing it completely away from your body and making it new again. It's an amazing idea. It's very Star Trek-y. So, and some of these kind of technologies like blockchain are enablers of being able to do it better, faster, for less money. So, very thankful for guys like you, women like you that are pushing this stuff out there and making it happen and educating everybody out in the industry, and on the edges of the industry that all need to be a part of it and buy into it together. So thank you guys so much for being on here. We
Thank
have reached
you.
the end of our time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. We'll be in touch, but thanks for being on here and helping us get to know what this is all about.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
guys.
inviting us.